Hello, I am Gregory, the poor typist, and welcome to a very special episode of Typewriter Club Live. As you see here, we have Mr. Joe Van Cleave with us as a special guest. You had your chance to ask him questions, and now he's going to answer the questions. So, how are you, Joe?
I am doing fine, Gregory. Thanks
Very
for
good.
hosting me.
Of course, of course. All right, well, let's get right to it. First, we're going to start with some introductory questions, and then we'll get to the sort of typewriter community submitted questions. So, who is Joe Van Cleave?
Well, I am a native of Albuquerque, New Mexico. My dad was a native of Albuquerque, and my grandfather, well, my great grandfather came to New Mexico territory in 1903 on a covered wagon. So we've been around a while here, and they were ranchers. My great grandpa was, but my dad, I have this photo I'll show you. This is a picture of my dad. He's on your right. This is in World War II on a camel. That's him right there. Anyways, it's kind of fun to show those old photos. So anyways, yeah, I grew up in Albuquerque, and my dad was worked out on Sandia Base for the Defense Nuclear Agency. And yeah, I grew up here and went in the Navy in the mid-late 70s and learned a little bit about electronics and video technology, and then spent a decade and a half as a consumer electronics guy. And then I started working in the semiconductor manufacturing industry in a chip fab here in the Albuquerque area, where I still work to this day. And on the side, of course, I have a number of hobbies, including blogging, photography, and YouTube, and of course, typewriters.
Excellent. So, basically, you've been in Albuquerque your entire life, it sounds like.
Yeah, I've traveled around the world. I was in the Navy for 6 years, so I've seen quite a bit of the Western Pacific. And people ask me about different countries I've been to, and I kind of remind people that back in the late 70s, the Navy used to have a commercial advertisement on TV, join the Navy and see the world. And the world is 75% water. So that's about the percentage of time that you're out at sea. So, but anyways, yeah, I did see a few cultures other than America in my time. But yeah, I've spent most of my life in Albuquerque. I did spend about 9 months up in the Portland, Oregon area back in the early 2000s, and I really loved Portland. If I had to move somewhere else, I'd probably be there.
Excellent. Now, on your YouTube channel and even on Typewriter Club Live, you've talked about what you believe is your first memory of typewriters.
Oh yeah.
But what are some of your other early memories of typewriters?
Well, my dad bought us three kids. I have two older brothers. He really bought my oldest brother a Hermes 10 electric type bar machine in probably 1971. That's the year I started freshman in high school. And then probably about 10th grade, I think, which is another 1972, I probably started typing class at my high school. And it was a large room, probably 200 kids, maybe, mostly girls. And the more popular girls got the IBM Selectrics, and then everybody else got some kind of electric type bar machine, probably some kind of Royal, as I remember. And that was really my formative years of learning to touch type. I think at the time I got up to maybe 35 words per minute in class, and that's accounting for errors and everything else. I probably type faster now, but yeah, 35 words per minute back in high school on an electric type bar machine. And then when I was in the Navy in the late 70s, I started, like a lot of young people do, I started writing poetry and stuff like that. I had an opportunity to borrow the senior chief's red IBM Selectric after hours when he wasn't using it. And I started typing up my poetry. And then when I got out of the Navy in 81, I wanted to continue typing my work on a typewriter that had a really good quality imprint. And so I went and bought one of these Smith Corona daisy wheel typewriters. I think it was the SE 100 typewriter. And I did a lot of typing on that. But it wasn't really until the early to mid 2000s when I visited the typewriter repair shop of John Lewis here in Albuquerque, and I got a Royal Mercury. Was my first real typewriter that I was interested in, for mainly because it was a ultra portable. And yeah, that kind of started my whole typewriter collecting.
Now, you mentioned you did take typewriter class, but have you kept up what you learned in the class, or have you changed your style at all?
I think I'm a touch typist pretty much, except with manual typewriters, there's a few modifications that I've had to do. I tend to, on my left hand, I tend to roll my pinky finger a little bit more on the letter A, and that occasionally causes me to hit the caps lock key. It depends on how close the caps lock is to the letter A, and depending on the keyboard of the typewriter, sometimes I'll modify my typing. So I'm either two-finger typing, or sometimes I will touch type with my right hand and single finger type with my left hand, which is kind of weird, but that works for me pretty well. But on a typewriter like the KMM, the Royal KMM, the caps lock is about halfway up toward the Q. It's not anywhere close to the letter A, and I can touch type pretty well without any interference on my left hand. So there are a few modifications I make. If I'm typing something that's going to be visible to other people, like a blog article or something where I don't want too many mistakes, I'll usually revert to two-finger typing, just because I get a more solid, darker imprint, a more consistent imprint, and less chance of errors, especially with the weaker fingers.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, here's a philosophical question for you. Why are typewriters important today?
Well, that is an interesting question. I think people have discovered or rediscovered that having a mechanical form of writing that focuses your attention on the writing only is a real powerful thing. And maybe we've lost sight of that in the intervening decades since, let's say, the late 70s or early 80s, when the personal computer revolution started. People maybe lost sight of the fact that there's something special about focused attention on writing. And that's not to say you can't focus writing with pen on paper or on a computer keyboard necessarily, but there is something special about manual typing, I think. And it's maybe something I have several theories, right? But one of the theories is that, our fingers and tendons and all the parts that make up the way our hands work, when you start typing on a manual typewriter, the linkages and type bars are sort of an extension of your ligaments and tendons and muscles. And so it becomes kind of what I call cybernetic, which is like a combination of biology and mechanics. And you can feel the feedback in your fingers from the typewriter. You can feel when the type bar hits the platen. You can tell one typewriter from another in the way that the feel is, or the action is, by the mechanical feedback. And so that is really, I think, cybernetic, literally, in the literal form of the word. And I think that's interesting. I think it's a blend of man and machine. And, humans have been tool makers since primordial times. So maybe there's something about, we like to use our tools, our implements, to create with. I don't know.
It's almost like a collaboration between man and machine.
Yeah, I think it is. I really do. Yes.
Excellent. Now, do you have a favorite decade or era of typewriters?
That's interesting. I I don't tend to collect typewriters from the standpoint of like decor or having a collection just like a museum kind of collection in a glass display case. I'm really kind of interested more in functionality. And I think for that reason, I tend to really like post World War II typewriters. Part of that has to do with age. They're going to be in generally better condition than a pre-World World War II typewriter. Uh, Not always, but oftentimes they are. So I think from the late 40s up until the maybe mid 70s, that era is an interesting era of typewriters because it spans, if you get right after World War II, you have machines that look very much like pre-World War II 1930s machines. But then very quickly into the early 50s, you start seeing a rapid change. Like if you look at the way the Smith Coronas went from the 1946 Sterling to the 5 Series Silent Supers, they changed their style considerably. And then up until the 1960s and Smith Corona and all that. So yeah, it's an interesting era. People don't like it as much often. They want the old machines, like, for instance, my Aunt Pat's Royal 10, which is right there to your left on the screen. Those are nice typewriters. I like that era, like say the pre-World War II standard upright typewriters are nice because they tend to be very rugged and repairable generally, and they're just built to last forever. Not so much the portables. The portables from the 20s and 30s can be troublesome at times. But as far as a practical, usable typewriter, I think 1950s is a really good era.
Excellent. And how do you personally use typewriters?
I use typewriters for blogging. I use typewriters for, and I not only write on my own blog, but I contribute to One Typed Page, which is a collaborative blog that's spearheaded by Daniel Marlowe. And there's a lot of, maybe more than a dozen people who contribute every day to that blog. So I've been doing that for the last year or so. I write what I call a typewritten journal, which is really just random thoughts whenever I get around to it that I'll hole punch and put in a 3-ring binder and collect up. I like to do rough drafts of creative stuff on typewriters. I hope to, in the next year, at the end of next year, I hope to retire from my main job, and I hope to maybe spend a little more time being able to creatively write. I don't have as much time right now to do that, mainly because the spare time I do have, I do tend to focus on what is going to be this week's YouTube video and other stuff like that. But and I have too many hobbies, other than that. But typewriters, I do want to do more creative writing with typewriters, though.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned your YouTube videos, and you have nearly 300 typewriter-related videos on your channel. Yep. Has YouTube had an influence on the typewriters you buy and collect?
I would say not necessarily. I don't think it's affected what I buy, but I do try to include whatever I acquire in a YouTube video. If I get a new typewriter, it's going to be featured on the channel. I will, maybe do an initial review of it, maybe showing how I clean or adjust it or whatever. And then as I go down the road of refining my usability with that typewriter, I might do additional videos. Like, for instance, I've done a series of videos on my Groma Calibri and the process of making it more usable, fixing the skipping problems and the other little issues it's had. And the latest change was making the touch a little bit better, because those machines don't have a touch adjustment. So I had to add my own spring in there. So yeah, I do tend to try to feature as much as I can all the typewriters I do acquire on the channel, but I don't think it really affects my collecting as much.
Okay. Now, let's see. Pretty much everyone that has an interest in typewriters that is online pretty much knows who you are. um, have you ever been recognized in public?
I actually, I think Brenda Blomberg, who has been on the Type Club Live, um, she recognized me because maybe 3 years ago, one of our first public type outs here in Albuquerque, her and her husband John were traveling through the area in their RV, and she had gotten word that there was going to be this typewriter gathering, and so she showed up, and she recognized me from the videos. Oh, I recognize you. But other than that, I don't think too many people have recognized me. Probably because um, maybe there's not that many people watching my channel locally, perhaps. Uh, and maybe the last year or so I haven't really gone out much as often as I used to, but because of the COVID thing. But yeah, no, I don't really get recognized that much locally or in person. But a lot of people do know my name because of my the work I've done on YouTube and my blog.
Okay. And many people know and love you for your typewriter related videos. But there's another huge part of your channel that deals with one of your other loves, photography. Can you talk about your love of cameras?
Yeah, so I like photography. So my photography background starts in high school. Uh, my dad gives us a Vivitar 110, one of these little black, little rectangular 110 film cameras. It kind of looks like the monolith on 2001, right? The shape of it. And I took, a typical kid that didn't know what he was doing. I think the most standout picture that I ever took with that was my brother and I faked a UFO picture with that, which was pretty interesting. But I really got interested in photography in the late 1970s when I was in the Navy. But then sometime in the mid 1980s, I wanted to get into black and white photography, and I started my own little primitive darkroom in my apartment. And then in the 90s, I built a darkroom in my house and started building pinhole cameras and other kinds of homemade cameras. And I've kind of been moderately obsessed with camera making, homemade camera building, and black and white photography, especially using large format paper negatives, that kind of stuff. That's what's been what I've mainly been interested in. And in fact, the YouTube channel itself was started because I wanted a way of documenting all of the various pinhole cameras and box cameras that I had made over the years. Had an enormous collection of these cameras piled up in the workshop in the garage and in my office and places like that. So my very first videos on this channel were actually of my cameras. And then it only wasn't until later that I started thinking, I have this interest in typewriters, and maybe I could start a series about typewriters. And I had no idea, of course, where that would go.
All right. And in thinking about your interests, and you kind of suggested the answer to this question, but in thinking about your interests, which came first, cameras or typewriters?
Um, that's interesting. They're sort of both. I mean, if I look at the back, I was interested in both about the same time. I mean, in as a kid in high school, I was taking typing class and I had a 110 camera. And then in the service in the late 70s, I was kind of doing both, although more interested in photography at the time. I guess my interest in photography really peaked before my interest in typewriters. That's a good way to put it.
Okay. And do you think your interest in typewriters and cameras are intertwined, or are they just distinct interests for you?
That's a good point. I don't know. Well, a lot of my photography interest is around handmade things, like handmade silver gelatin prints in the darkroom, or handcrafted box cameras of some kind, right? Primitive, simple tools. Uh, And then the typewriting, of course, they are mechanical also, they're hand operated. So maybe there's some kind of an obscure connection there. Uh, I guess you could generally call them analog media, although I dislike the term analog media because it only means something in context in opposition to digital, and we didn't call it analog back in the day. So, but it's yeah, it's hand wrought technology, I guess, hand wrought in terms of hands-on and a hands-on process, especially if you think about darkroom work. Not as much taking your roll of film to a lab and having them do it, but doing it yourself is definitely hands-on, and maybe that's what I like about both of them, is the hands-on nature of it.
Okay. Now, many YouTube creators use a service called Patreon to help fund their channels. Is that something you've considered?
Yeah, I've thought about it, and I might start that probably when I retire in the next year. It would give me more time to offer additional content to Patreon supporters, because you have to have an inducement for people to want to sponsor you. And right now, my income from YouTube is very marginal, and it really only pays for a few additional pieces of gear once in a while. So maybe I'll focus a little bit more on the channel full time when I retire, and then I might decide to do Patreon probably.
And how else can we help support your channel?
I would just say click the like button and subscribe to my channel. And if you like what you see, share it on the Facebook groups and let people know that I'm putting out this content. And if it interests you, it might interest other people. So share it.
Excellent. Good advice. Now you've published books, both of the written word and your photography. Are there any more books in your future, and perhaps a typewriter related book?
That's interesting. I don't have a typewriter book in mind yet. I mean, when I think of typewriter books, right, I'm thinking of the Typewriter Revolution, right, of Richard Polt. And I really can't imagine anybody superseding that work as far as the modern typewriter revival era that we live in. And I think if there was some additional work to be done in terms of that, I would almost suspect Richard himself would be working on a sequel, perhaps. But I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. Other people have photo books, like picture books of typewriters. My typewriter collection isn't as much photogenic or museum grade as it is functional. I do have some fiction that I've worked on over the years that has sort of sat in a state of just waiting for me to get back to it. A little bit of dystopian sci-fi that I want to finish that story and maybe get it out there, and a few other things.
Okay. And by the way, where can people find your books?
So if you look on Blurb and search for Joe Van Cleave, you'll see I have several books. I have a couple photo books, 3 photo books, and then there's a book of short stories that I've written also. So they're all available on Blurb.
Excellent. And do you link to that also from your blog?
Do I have a link on my blog? That is a good question. I don't know if
Sorry
I do.
to put you on the spot.
No, I probably should, at one point.
But they can go to Blurb and search.
Yeah, so they can go to Blurb and look for Joe Van Cleave.
Okay. And other than typewriters and cameras, what are some of your other interests?
Well, I have some childhood interests that I've focused on over the years as an adult. When you grow up in Albuquerque in the early 70s, you can't help but get interested in lighter than air things like balloons and airships. And I I still am, I guess. I'm interested in the history of the airship and rigid airships and things like that. I have a whole big, huge library of that kind of stuff. I used to, more so than now, but I used to be very interested in drawing, designing mazes, and kind of studying the mathematics of mazes and how they work. Video production, I was, so the background I have in video production is I was a repair person for video technology when I was in the Navy. Aircraft carriers have at least 3 different video systems on them. And that's the hardware side of video. And then I became interested in film, and then became interested in experimental video work. And that led me down the road to kind of doing a series of analog experimental videos back in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. So that kind of stuff always interested me before we had the technology of YouTube and of very accessible video editing that we have now.
Excellent. And you've kind of recently revisited some of your early films on your YouTube channel. What are you calling those short videos?
Well, let's see. I used to do this little show called the Joe Show, and I would set a camcorder up in my living room, point it at the couch, and the camcorder would go to the VCR, and then I would see my picture on the TV next to it. And I would record these stupid little things on my camcorder. And occasionally one of my brothers would come by, or my friend Bob would come by, and we had some funny moments that we recorded on tape. So I have some of these old analog tapes of that. That is rather funny. And then sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s, me and a friend made a half-hour sci-fi movie on video called Bosky Abduction, and it was a funny kind of campy movie that I hope to. It used to be on YouTube. My friend Dave, who co-starred and did the edit, he had the movie on YouTube, and then because he was using a background music track that he got permission from a company to use, and that company got bought up by another company and rescinded his rights to use the music. So he had to pull the movie off of YouTube. And so I have the raw camcorder tapes from that whole project, and I need to re-edit the whole movie, and with new background sound in order to get it back on YouTube. So that's another long project that will be probably taking up my time once I retire, hopefully. So eventually, Bosky Abduction will be back on YouTube, and everybody can watch the campy sci-fi special effects and bad acting.
That is excellent. All right, so we have a ton of questions from the typewriter community, so let's get right down to it. The first one comes from George Austria in Austin, Texas. He says, the historian David McCullough's favorite typewriter is the standard Royal KMM. Have you tried that machine? And if so, do you find that it is definitely worth having as far as a workhorse typewriter for a touch typist?
Yes, I have that machine. It's right to my left. That sounds kind of funny. It's over there, and I do love it. My KMM I bought from John Lewis. It was totally reconditioned by him. It is a worthy workhorse typewriter, and it is a typewriter you can touch type on. For me, especially, the shift lock key is nowhere near the A key. So if you have that problem with your left hand, you can touch type fine on that machine, provided it's been properly serviced. Because if it has, decades of old grease in it, the touch might not be as light as you would otherwise get it. And I do have a series of videos. Let's see, episode 258 was about the storage case. Episode 254 was the typewriter itself, and 252 was about acquiring the KMM. And yeah, so I think those are very worthy typewriters to collect. Any Royal, upright, full-size standard typewriter of that era is going to be a good typewriter.
And his other question is, how much would you pay for one if you found one for sale? Which
If you
obviously
found, as is, I wouldn't pay more than $100 as is. But if you find it reconditioned by a professional typewriter repair person, you might pay upwards of $300 because you're paying for their experience and their service. So it depends on whether you're handy or not, and how much work you want to put into it.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so the next few questions come from our own Ted Monk, and he's in Mesa. So can you tell us about the Joe Show and what elements of those old VHS days productions that you have retained for your current video projects?
Yeah, so I've already touched a little bit on the Joe Show. I also have that camcorder, my Sony Hi8 camcorder that shoots analog 4:3 video. And I really want to digitize some of my experimental videos I've done and put them out on the channel, and also maybe start using the camcorder itself for B-roll. You've seen this effect probably with other creative videos, is they'll cut in, I've seen this on regular like Hollywood movies, where they will sometimes cut in Super 8 film on a little short clip to give the mood, give the scene a different mood. I'd like to do that with analog video because it has a certain particular lo-fi look that looks different than digital. So I definitely would like to do that. And as I said earlier, I'd like to eventually get Bosky Abduction re-edited and back on YouTube, and my other old analog tapes back, on YouTube also.
Excellent. And his next question is there a collective name for the current video projects other than the subcategorizations like Typewriter Video Series and This Is Not a Vlog?
So I guess the best way to think of them is I have them organized under playlists. If you go to my channel, there's a tab for playlists, and you'll see all of the Typewriter video series in the playlist for that. There's a playlist for photography videos. There's a playlist for This Is Not a Vlog, and my latest little really short camcorder footage playlist is there also. So that's the best way I can say to find my my videos organized by theme, I guess, is YouTube playlists.
Okay. And his final question is, my understanding is that you work for a secretive organization in a clean room in the New Mexico desert. So what color are the alien corpses, and are you allowed to drive the UFO?
Well, that's interesting. So of course, that's a lighthearted, silly question from Ted, and we joke about that a lot, but I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you want to go with this, but there was something that happened in 1947 in New Mexico, but it was actually started by the Army Air Corps when they made a press conference in Roswell about something they found in the desert. And it's important to point out that that was initiated by the military. And my dad, when he started working on Sandia Base in 1949 or 50, he was working at Monsanto Base when they were building it. And if you're not familiar with Albuquerque, it's an underground base. It's inside the mountain. And so there was a lot of secret work going on in that area back in the 1970s and early 80s involving laser weapons and particle beam and energy, directed energy weapons. And at the same time all that was happening, there was a guy named Paul Benowitz that lived in Southeast Albuquerque next to the Air Force Base. and he was seeing weird lights over the Manzanos. And he got contacted by a Air Force counterintelligence officer named Richard Doty. And this is all kind of part of the modern mythology, but Richard Doty was a counterintelligence officer, and he basically fed Paul Benowitz a lot of interesting stuff about potential UFOs. And I guess what I'm getting is the whole modern UFO phenomenon was a counterintelligence operation started by the military to hide secret, projects going on. And it's all kind of centered here in Albuquerque is where a lot of it started. If you remember, not too many people knew about Roswell until 1979 or 1980, when the book, The Roswell Incident, was published by Charles Berlitz and William Moore. And William Moore came to Albuquerque to research the Roswell incident, and you never guess whose house he lived in for 6 months while he was researching it. He lived in Paul Benowitz's house, next to the Air Force Base, the same guy that was being fed counterintelligence myths about UFOs to cover up the whole secret research going on at Sandia Base. So I think the whole modern UFO thing is a counterintelligence operation. And New Mexico is involved because, that's where the atom bomb was invented and all that. So, and I happen to work at a high-tech chip fab in the Albuquerque area. So anyways, that was a nice little deep dive into all kinds of weird stuff.
All right. So the next question comes from Dan Linder in Westeros, Sweden. I probably slaughtered that name, but anyway. Have you ever displayed your typer collection, typer being short for typewriter,
Yes.
at a museum or an exhibition? Or if your answer is no, what typewriters, brands, models would you like to exhibit and why?
That's interesting. As I said earlier, I don't consider my collection to be like a museum kind of collection. It's more of an assortment of functional tools for me to create with. I think the only public time I've actually shown my typewriters is really during live typewriter gatherings locally, and of course what I've shown on my channel. But I have a few typewriters that are pre-World War II, like the Royal 10 here, and the KMM is right after World War II. I have a Underwood from 1930s, but it's not in museum grade shape. The paint is worn. So I think if I was to show my collection, it would be more about showing them as functional tools. I mean, if you look at, let's say, a 1970s Hermes 3000, it's a very functional writing tool. It's the same mechanics as the early 60s Hermes 3000. It's just in a plastic square boxy body shell, but it doesn't look like a classic typewriter. It looks like a 1970s plastic appliance. I guess my interest is in showing people that these are tools to be used and not necessarily to be put on a shelf and just adored just for that reason alone.
Excellent answer. Right, so the next one comes from William J. Lester in Stavely, I believe up in Canada. His first part is, although I've only watched a few of your YouTube videos, I have enjoyed all those I have watched. In your videos, as well as when you tell stories on Typewriter Club Live, your style of storytelling always captures my full attention. I find myself thinking of how oral history was passed from one generation to the next by living stories in the days before the written word. My question is, did you have any formal training in storytelling, or is it a natural talent or gift, or is it some of both?
Well, that's an interesting question. I haven't really had formal training other than taking a few creative writing classes. I think I took a creative writing class in high school that kind of unlocked for me a lot of inner potential. In other words, I discovered I had the potential for creative writing, just like I took a speech class in high school. And before I took the speech class, I was very shy about standing up in front of people and talking. But having gone through that class, and you have a little project where you have to, have some topic and you write it up on index cards, and you have to stand up in front of the room and make your talk. After I went through that and I learned the mechanics of how to make a talk, a speech, I lost all self-consciousness about being up in front of people. So I did tinker around with creative writing on my own. And when I was later in high school and early adult in the service, I just wrote a bunch of silly stuff. I think I'm going to probably publish some of that on my blog eventually. I mean, it's really bad in a lot of ways, but it's very silly and creative at the same time. And so I kind of felt that I gave myself permission to be creative for myself. It wasn't intended, there was no audience intended to read it. And I think that freed me up to be as free as I possibly could about writing for myself, because I didn't have to worry about how bad it was and how, sentence structure and composition and all that. I didn't have to worry about it. I could just satisfy my own creative urge. And if you go through that process, you'll of course learn to be a better writer, to the point where then you will feel like sharing with others. But I think it's important to write for yourself. And that's kind of what I've done over the years.
Okay. And the next part from William is more of a comment. So in some of my typewritten letters to other Type Pals members, when the subject of other members comes up, I describe you as a warm-hearted, gifted storyteller.
Well, that's a wonderful comment, William. Thank you. Maybe it's just the fact that when you get old enough, you have enough life experience that you have a few funny stories to tell. And if you tell them over and over again, you might get better at telling them, even though your wife doesn't want to hear them ever again.
All right, so the next person is David Corneli in Stuttgart, Germany. So he says, the Typewriter video series and your other channels that document your journeys have excellent production quality, which must be time consuming. My question is, how do you manage your time and find efficiencies to be able to produce so much high quality content while also working, I think, a full-time job?
Good question. Hi, David. So I work a compressed work week at my job. And so that means I work 12-hour days, and I work 3 days on and 3 days off, and 4 days on and 4 days off. So I do have longer weekends. That's one thing. But I also brainstorm ideas for my videos and write them down. In fact, I have somewhere along here, I have a little hint here that I'm supposed to show you my card file system for how this is like potential subject matter for videos of different things, not just typewriter videos. But every time I have an idea, I'll write it down on an index card and ring bind it. And that's one way to, document ideas. If you wake up in the middle of the night, you have an idea for an angle that might be a good video, you want to immediately write it down. So I have a notepad by my nightstand, and I kind of brainstorm those ideas ahead of time. And then as far as production quality, I have a little studio here that I've cobbled together. I try to make it so it's really easy to start shooting video. I have lights already set up. I have this little wooden framework over a desk I built, and the lights are there, and I can just turn on a plug strip and the lights come on. The camera is already mounted, ready to go. I can just plug in a microphone that's already there. I turn on the preamp for the mic. So in just a minute or so, I can sit down in front of the thing and start recording video. So I make the process as easy as possible to start with, and then I make the editing process as easy as possible. So I'm using iMovie on a Mac Mini, and there are a lot of other video production softwares that are maybe more capable than iMovie, but iMovie has such an easy learning curve and is quite functional and does things very quick. So it helps me to get videos done and edited and posted as quick as I can.
Excellent.
Also, having good audio, I should mention, good audio is very important. Because television, so video came from television, and television technology came from radio. And so if you compare cinema with TV, cinema's on a giant screen and it can work as a silent medium, like the early days of silent film worked. Television originally were tiny little screens, and it originated from radio technology. So audio is much more important in TV than it is in cinema. So you want to have good audio anyways.
Definitely. And you mentioned and even suggested that, you know, iMovie has its limitations, but looking at some of your videos, you have some really, really artsy videos you've done that just blow my mind that you did those in iMovie. So.
Well, it's surprising, you know, when I was doing a lot of analog video production back in the late 90s, I asked myself, what can a camcorder do? Like you could shoot silent black and white video on an analog camcorder, and you're essentially at the same place that film was in the 1920s when they were doing silent video on black and white film. But you have this little thing in your hand that you can do it with, right? That's much easier. And the same thing is true today. iMovie is a simple video editing suite, but it gives you a lot of capabilities. And it's really about how much attention you want to place on special effects and special kinds of transitions. And does that really buy you anything in terms of storytelling? You know, like what's the essence of storytelling? Is it really about video effects, or is it more about the art of montage and the art of just being able to tell the story, you know?
Very good. All right. So up next, we have Natasha Rawls from Cordova, Tennessee. She says, your videos have been extremely helpful to me in my relatively short time of collecting, repairing, and using typewriters. My question is, what is your editing process for your videos? And you've touched on that a little bit.
So I try to do like a main dialogue intro, the main angle you see on my main camera, which, you know, I'm shooting a Panasonic. I have a couple of these Panasonic Micro Four Thirds cameras. This is the GH3, and I'm using, this is a cinema lens, a Rokinon cinema lens. Anyways, I have a main setup for that kind of an intro, and then I have a close-up lens, a manual focus lens that I use on my B-roll. I have a homemade arm that I can suspend the camera over my work surface. It's just a wooden arm on a tripod with a counterweight, and then it just sort of sits there. It floats in air right above the work surface. I can focus manually, so I can get really close into the typewriters and get close detail. Then I'll do various kinds of B-rolls. Like I'll typically do, if it's a typewriter video, I'm going to shoot some kind of B-roll of me typing, and I want to have that narrow depth of focus kind of look with the camera coming from the side, and you can see the carriage kind of moving and me typing and all that. I try to have that, and I save those clips, by the way, so I can use them in future videos. And then, so I try to edit my videos by looking at the audio waveform. So when you have in the timeline of your video, you'll have the clip itself, and then you have the audio below it, and you'll see the waveform of the audio. And you can see interruptions and pauses in your talking. In fact, I have a little piece of paper taped to my video, my computer monitor, that says no hems, no haws, no ums, no ahs, meaning I'll say this and then I'll say that. Well, when I'm video editing, I cut those out. In fact, it has a certain shape to it in the audio waveform. I can actually tell just by looking at them. I cut those out and I do a little video dissolve so that you don't see my head jerk like that in the edit. It'll sort of blend in a little bit more. So I try to edit out all the interruptions and pauses and ums and ahs. And also, I make it easy for myself to edit by when I'm in the middle of talking on the camera and I know that the way I've said this line is going to lead me to a dead end. I'm going to have to stop and restate it. I'll just pause, give myself 2 or 3 seconds and restart with the camera rolling. And I'll rephrase it. And while I'm rephrasing it, if I know in my mind it doesn't sound good, I'll even stop, pause, and then say it again. And then when I go import that footage on my editor, I can see, oh, this is those two I'll get rid of. And this last take is the one I'm going to use. So I give myself several takes, and it makes the editing easier. And so I edit mainly by looking at the audio. It really helps a lot.
Okay, kind of my own follow-up question would be, have there been any videos you've had to scrap for one reason or another?
There is usually at least a clip or two in a video that I don't use, that I think at the time I'm going to use. Like I commonly will talk too much. You couldn't imagine me doing that probably, but believe it or not, I actually talk too much. And I will often restate a previous clip by saying it a different way. And then when I'm in the middle of the edit, I'll say, you know what, this whole clip is just redundant. It's saying the same thing I said earlier. And I'll have to choose between one or the other, but not use both of them. I do have a few projects, however, on my iMovie project list that I have never finished. Some of that is stuff I've not gotten around to, but other stuff, like I was wanting my friend Kevin to help collaborate with a project involving typewriter art. And he, at the same time, he got a book of typewriter art that actually told you how to type all these pictures out. And then he got a Smith Corona 6 series that had a dual color ribbon set up. And he was making his own dual color ribbons by splicing together 2 different colored ribbons with this little silvery leader tape in the middle. And we got to thinking, with a 4-color ribbon, you could really do some really cool typewriter art. And that was going to be a whole project. So I have this folder of some initial clips we shot for that, and that was 2 years ago. So we've both been busy. So yeah, so there's a few projects that are unfinished, but it's mostly my own fault. I can't blame Kevin for that.
I know, right?
If I really want to do a thing on typewriter art, I should just learn to do typewriter art myself, Anyways.
There you go. All right, so we have Monica in Fairfax, Virginia. What is the best resource for identifying type size and font? I don't have a ribbon in my other J5, and there's some paperwork with it that appears to identify fonts. It's very interesting, but it's in German, which I suppose I could use Google Translate, but I'm wondering if there is a link online that focuses on type size and font for various typewriters and years.
Well, first of all, I would think the typewriter database that's maintained by Ted Monk, contributed to by all of us, is a great resource. There are a number of people who do put type samples on their typewriter galleries. And I'd recommend to everybody that not only should you enter all your typewriters on the database, become a typewriter hunter, but include pictures, but also samples of your typeface. But as far as what typefaces they actually are, that's a little bit more difficult of a problem. The typewriter repair Bibles that Ted Monk has been reprinting, some of those have typewriter typefaces in them. Like I'm especially thinking of the Smith Corona Floating Shift Bible. In the back of that, there is a whole section of Smith Corona typefaces that they had at the time. But we don't have that information for necessarily every brand of typewriter, especially European brands. But having said that, if you take a high-powered magnifying glass and look closely at the type slug, between the upper and lower case, you'll see a little symbol engraved in there, and that's an indication of the foundry mark of the type slug itself, who made that type slug, that typeface. So there isn't one real Bible or authoritative source for this. There's, like I say, typewriter database, the repair Bibles. There's also social media. Some of the Facebook groups You can ask people about typefaces, and there's sort of a cultural knowledge about some of these that people can help you with. So another good reason to be tied in socially to the typewriter groups.
I agree. And she finishes just with a comment. She says, "Thank you so much for all you do online. I'm a new collector, and your YouTube channel is great to watch."
Thank you very much.
All right. So up next we have Indro Vanderploem. He asks, he's in the Netherlands. He asks, when and what made you collect and use typewriters?
Well, I've laid out my history of typewriters pretty much. I didn't really cover the very earliest mention of typewriters in my history was when I was a tiny little kid, and I was in my mother's lap, and she was typing a letter and all that. But I think it was in the early to mid 2000s. So I had kind of abandoned my interest in typewriters through most of the 1990s because I got interested in computers and printers and all that. And then sometime in the early 2000s, I went to John Lewis's shop and bought some kind of a medium-sized Adler manual typewriter. For some reason, I got interested in them again. And actually, the Adler was a pretty good machine, although at the time, I didn't really appreciate it as much as I would have now. But I thought it was kind of big and heavy. And so a few years later, I came back and kind of traded John for the Royal Mercury. So it was getting my first ultra portable, the Royal Mercury. And then I started blogging around 2006. So I think 2006 is when the blogging started, but I wasn't typing yet. It wasn't until 2007 or 2008 that I started doing typecasting with my first typewriters on my blog. That was when I really became conscious of typewriters and collecting. I also discovered the typosphere, the other typewriter bloggers. And that was kind of the start of it all right there. And I think that illustrates the importance of the typewriter community, not only on the Facebook groups, but I would even argue more importantly is typewriter blogging itself. Because I think blogging is a form of social media that is more accessible in terms of an archive. Like if you take Facebook, for instance, Facebook is like a person with amnesia. Like you can only search back easily the last 12 hours maybe or something on Facebook easily. They purposefully want you to keep discovering new stuff. It's part of their business model. But on a blog, you can go back decades on someone's blog and the archives are all there. So I like blogging for that reason. It is like an online version of a newspaper or magazine, a periodical. So anyway, that's how I got started, really is about blogging.
Okay. And the next part of his question is, what made you create your YouTube channel? You've touched on a little bit.
It was mainly starting out to document my camera building and my pinhole photography kind of stuff. But then I one day started thinking, because when I first started the channel, I wasn't making videos very often. It was maybe once every couple months or a few weeks. But then I discovered, I have this interest in typewriters. Why can't I start a channel about typewriters? And I started it from the standpoint of, it was kind of my own process. I was kind of documenting my process. So the very first few videos were about, if you had to collect typewriters, where are you going to start? And I started with some ultra portables and I kind of compared them and talked about which ones I like and what features they had. And then, it kind of kept going, and I discovered about every week or so I was making videos. And then as the number of videos began to accumulate, I discovered that I wasn't really running out of topics to talk about. And I really enjoyed the way the channel and my focus has evolved over the intervening couple of years I've done this, because it's not been as much about the details of the mechanics or digging into how things are fixed or repaired as you would find on like Dwayne Jensen's Phoenix Typewriter channel. He's probably the premier typewriter repair channel. But I've gotten more into like the philosophy of typing, or the usability of typewriters in a larger context of the creative lifestyle, and how typewriters fit into that, right? And it's a bigger thing. It's like dealing with typing paper, correction tape, and how you use typewriters, how you fit it into your life. That's kind of my bigger focus, is enabling people to be creative with them.
Very good. All right. So up next, we have John Maillet in Canada has a camera related question for you. He asks, have you ever thought of how to place a photo paper in an old Polaroid swing door camera to take a shot with?
Yes, I had a Polaroid 800 camera. Funny you mentioned that. And let's see, I did that. These are Harman direct positive paper. So I will focus on this one. This is just a corner of my front patio. And you can see the film gate on the Polaroid makes these little rounded corners. And this camera has like two doors, an inner one and an outer one that swing open. And then this was my little Mazda 2 car that I still have. And you'll notice the writing on it is backwards, the Mazda logo, because this direct positive paper, that's what happens. And then there's a shot of me a few years ago with glasses on. I don't have those glasses anymore. They were nice. Anyways, yes, I have done that. And it is kind of fun. I've also I built a giant box with 2 arm sleeves, and I had a couple, those little 3-drawer plastic storage bins you put on your desk. I use one of those to develop paper in. You just developer stop, bath, and fixer, and it fits in that box with the arm sleeves. And I could put my Polaroid camera in there, open up the doors, and load in pieces of photo paper like these in that camera. And then I even figured out I had the instruction manual for the camera, and it told me all of the shutter speeds and apertures for each shutter speed setting. So I was able to figure out the exposures and with a meter. And yeah, so that worked, definitely.
Excellent. All right. So up next we have Emily Tillman in DeWitt. She asks, have you tried sketching with a typewriter? And again, you touched on this a little bit, but have you actually tried it without, reading a book on it or something like that?
I actually have not done the typewriter art, but I actually did a series of cartoons. I was making little stick figures with typewriter symbols, and I might have done a few of those in one of my blog articles, a little bit, just tinkering with the idea of stick figure typewriter cartoon characters. And then I would type out a little caption and just draw a balloon around it. That's about as far as I got with it. Because a lot of people have done the typewriter art thing. It's nothing new, and it reminds me back in the early days of the computer, people were doing ASCII art. You would write computer programs that could take an image file and convert it into an ASCII file that would print out on a printer, like typewriter style, monospaced font kind of stuff. But that's about it for typewriter drawing.
Okay. And her next question is a hypothetical question, because as most of us are aware, mechanical things do not do well with long periods of non-use. However, what typewriter would you choose to go into a time capsule that would be opened in 100 years? And it doesn't necessarily have to be from your personal collection.
Well, I would probably choose something like the Royal 10 because it was around for several, 3 or 4 decades, basically. And actually, if you look at the later Royal standard upright machines, the inner chassis was pretty much an update of the Royal 10. So, but I think that's a good representation of the early half of the typewriter period, and has all the features of more modern standard manual typewriters. And they type really well. and they look very classy. That would be a great typewriter to have in a time capsule.
Yeah. Okay. And next up, we have Eric J. Tidd in Decatur, Georgia. His first question is, have you ever thought about setting up an Instagram account?
You know, I actually have an Instagram account that's inactive. I started it back about 10 years ago when I got my first iPhone or whatever, and it was putting photos. I actually use Yahoo for I have a professional unlimited data account on Yahoo. So I use Yahoo as a backup medium, and I use it for any picture that's going to go on my blog. I put it on Yahoo and then I cross-link it to my blog. So I don't really do Instagram. I could, I guess, but I'm not really interested in the process of acquiring likes that social media like Instagram kind of encourages you to do. I like the accessibility of Flickr rather than rather than that kind of social media. Yeah, I'm on Facebook, right? And I'm mixed about Facebook, about some of their policies and the way they do things. And they also own Instagram, right? So, I can't say I'm opposed to them because I am on Facebook, but I like Flickr better, which used to be owned by Yahoo. So.
Excellent. Now, his next question is, and it's one I'm very curious about as well. He says, I loved participating in your writing assignments. Do you think you'll start those up again?
Yeah, I think I will. Yeah, I will. They do take quite a bit of time to assemble the results. And that's always been a problem. But yeah, I do want to start the typing assignments again. It is a good exercise for people. And I've, gained a lot of knowledge about people. I get correspondence from people I initially met them through the typing assignments. So yeah, I do want to continue typing assignments. I kind of feel like I'm in a kind of a transitional phase here, like there's a lot of things I want to do, and I really don't have as much time to do it as I want.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. All right, so next up we have Dina from, excuse me, Dina from Mystic, Connecticut. She asks, where could I find a typewriter ribbon that actually has sufficient ink loaded in it for my Brother Charger 11, which includes the correction option, although I didn't buy that specific correction ribbon type, just a plain ribbon. So what would you recommend a place for her to buy ribbon?
I would recommend that she should get a silk or cotton ribbon instead of a nylon ribbon, and get it from Ribbons Unlimited. Just look for Ribbons Unlimited on the internet, and you can call Lanny. I think his phone number is on his website, and tell him what kind of ribbon you have. And I would start with silk. They're a little bit more expensive than the nylon ones, but they're darkly inked. And if silk isn't quite dark enough, I would go with cotton. Cotton is going to be the darkest ribbon you can get. But the cotton ribbons that Lanny sells are 12 yards long instead of 15 or 16. They're a little shorter, but they work. And I would not recommend using a correction ribbon. That is the ribbons that has the lower half is white, because those will clog up your machine with little white flakes and it'll cause problems. It's better to use, you can use a variety of things. My friend Kevin likes to use erasing pencils. You can buy erasing pencils new still. On the right kind of paper, they erase pretty good. There is whiteout, the liquid type whiteout. I don't recommend it because it's slow. Because when you paint it on the paper, you have to wait for it to dry before you can overtype it, and that slows you down. What I do recommend is correction tape, and I like the Staples brand. These Staples brand cartridges work really well. I think they're better than the whiteout brand or the Bic brand. Myself personally, and that's my favorite. That was my neighbor's car alarm. You might have heard in the background. Thank you, Dennis. And so I would not use an in typewriter correction ribbon. I would use external correction. And also, this is like me preaching to the choir. I'm kind of hung up over wanting everything perfect as far as typing. And oftentimes it's hard for me to type something and leave. Like, I can't easily do X out corrections like some people can. But I've seen some really good blogs where people are very comfortable with strike through corrections and they look really good. I just have a problem myself doing it. It's a self-consciousness. But I would, encourage you to maybe just be a little bit less hung up over perfect type and just realize that strike throughs and corrections might be part of the whole aesthetic of manual typing.
Excellent. Now, we do have a lot of people that are either brand new to typewriters or they haven't used them in decades and they're getting back into using them. So they might not be familiar with all the little features and missing features of typewriters. So her second question asks, why is there an exclamation point key on this typewriter?
That's a good question. So exclamation keys were started to be common in sometime in the 1950s, I think, but they weren't always on every typewriter. And you'll find the same is true of the number one key, right? Your Charger 11 may have a number one, I don't know. But yeah, exclamation keys weren't always on typewriters. And more so, when you get into the 1970s and later 70s, you would generally find both exclamation mark and the number one were common. But by the time you get to the late 70s, the typewriters weren't being built very well anymore. So one option for an exclamation mark is if you press and hold the space bar and then press the shift key and then type your, your quote mark, your apostrophe, sorry, which is usually a shifted 8, and then type the period. It'll line up the period and the shifted and the apostrophe over one another and make a makeshift exclamation mark for you. So that's one option to do.
Excellent. All right. So the next few questions come from a friend of yours, Bill Teft, right there in Albuquerque. His first question is, how did you get to be so QWERTY?
I don't even know what that means, but well, Bill and I are both Albuquerque natives, so maybe that's what he's talking about. I don't know. That's a funny question. How do you answer that?
I know, right?
Oh, maybe he meant I'm quirky. I'm Albuquerque. That's what it is.
All right. So I'm curious about the next one. Who or what was your favorite teacher subject in high school and why?
Well, I mentioned I took a creative writing class, and that was actually rather important to me later on in life, I realized. But at the time, my favorite subject and teacher was it was drafting, and the teacher was Rob Mangold. Mr. Mangold, this was drafting was part of the industrial arts curriculum. And I took 1 year of basic drafting, and the second year was 2 semesters of architectural drafting. And what I did in the architectural drafting program, I think the first semester I spent trying to design some kind of a house. We had to design a house and draw it out. But then I became interested in inflatable buildings, air supported structures. Of course, I would be interested in that, right? And I actually bought a couple really interesting books from MIT Press on air supported structures. And then I talked my drafting teacher into letting me, instead of finishing the second semester by drafting a house or whatever, I was going to build inflatable dome building in the drafting class. And so I got a seal and meal, one of those plastic bag sealers that I had to modify. I got a couple rolls of the 4 mil thick construction grade plastic film, the clear, I think clear and black. And I started cutting out gores and making this heat sealed dome, this inflatable dome that I was building in the back of the classroom. And it turned out to be like 12 feet in diameter and 6 foot tall. It was black top and bottom and a clear band of windows around the middle of it. And at the time we had these big books of like architectural catalogs, of interior design and windows, all that. And they were really heavy. So we would put these books around the base of the inflatable dome to keep it down, because it was all heat sealed to a big square of plastic. And then we had a box fan, like a 2 foot square box fan to inflate it with, and then just like a slit kind of a door. And so, then I started building a couple other air supported structures like that. So I became known as the dome guy, the inflatable dome guy in high school, in drafting class, instead of actually learning to draft, which I was already pretty good at.
All right. And now, for those that attend Typewriter Club Live Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific, we've gotten used to seeing you eat your breakfast while you're joining us, but we don't mind. We like seeing what you're eating. But Bill asks, how's your appetite?
Yeah, I wrote as an answer, but ravenous, barely under control. Usually by the time I log on, Sunday mornings, I'm about ready for breakfast. And usually it's something with eggs, so it's always messy, and eggs are everywhere and all that. So,
and as I said, we do not mind.
Well, I think it's like if you're having a meal together, right? You're eating together. You're going to see other people eat, and the fact that you're on live stream doing it, it seems different, but it's just virtual. It's a virtual gathering, right? We're all meeting together, and that's cool.
I agree. All right. So next up, we have Lee Kennedy in Leeds, West Yorkshire, UK. Firstly, I would just like to thank you for the vlogs you make and the education you provide to the typewriter community. I've learned a lot from you and have been inspired by you.
Thank you.
All right. And she says, I suspect you'll get quite a few typewriter questions. So instead, I was wondering when you first became involved in filmmaking and how you edit your footage.
Yeah. Well, we covered a little bit of that, but the too long didn't read version is late 70s, US Navy. I was an IC electrician with an NEC 4746 enlisted classification code for closed circuit video, closed circuit TV. So I basically learned the basics of analog video, cameras and recorders and all the technology. The decade of the 80s, I was a TV repairman, basically a VCR camcorder mainly. In the 1990s, I delved into experimental films with video technology after being inspired by a local group that are still together called Basement Films, and they have tens of thousands of Super 8 and 16 millimeter films in their library that they use to make video or film shows. Yeah, I became interested in experimental films, made a number of them, and studied film in terms of read a bunch of filmmaking books, kind of educated myself on film, and in the process of all that, I sort of learned a little bit about it, and now I edit video on my Mac using a simple tool called iMovie that's built into all. When I started this channel, I was actually got to thinking I was probably editing videos on my iPad, and there was a point where I was also using, I don't know if you know what an iPod Touch is, but it's a little smaller than an iPhone. Little iPod, it has iMovie also. And so if you can import your camcorder footage using a little dongle like this with your SD card and plugged into your iOS device, you can actually edit on a mobile Apple device. So that that was probably what I was doing early on in my YouTube channel, but it seems to work okay. So that's kind of the background of that. It's not really about how fancy the editing software is, because all you really need is to be able to do a simple montage. What I mean by montage is, here's a clip, you cut to another clip, cut to another clip, and the sequence of clips tells a story and implies something, right? And you don't need a lot of technology for that. That's the essence of filmmaking, right? Is montage.
Excellent. And her next question, and I'm very curious about this as well. She says, I wondered if you would be interested in making a vlog about filmmaking and the editing process for novices.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, there's a lot of YouTube channels out there that are showing you how to do the latest software, you know, whether it's DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere or whatever, and all the plugins for that, and doing, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. But it would be great to start from the perspective of a beginner. How do you get started? What's the simplest tools to use? Because there's a lot of people that want to tell stories that don't want to really be involved in the mechanics as much. Like the old saying, you don't really want to know how sausage is made. It's kind of like that. I think the people, like, I'm using an analogy here from still photography, but sometimes the best photographic artists are people that are technically very basic. In other words, people that aren't really interested in cameras. They're not interested in the ins and outs of how they work. They just want to use them as tools to document and create, right? And I think that's important. You don't need to know the mechanics of things as much as just to be able to put things together and make stories. So anyways, yeah, I think it's a possibility. I would love to maybe start a series on basic, simple filmmaking and video making.
Excellent. Yeah. And I mean, you know, we've seen kind of behind the scenes of your studio, particularly during Typewriter Club Live. And I would be very interested even to just see videos about kind of like behind the scenes of you setting up your shots and maybe some outtakes. And
yes, I had a couple last week where I was, yeah, a couple 4-letter words showed up on tape. I think it was my neighbor's beep, beep, beep of his truck, you know, right in the middle of a clip.
Oh. Oh.
Anyway, that's right. What I get for keeping my window open.
I know, right? But you are in New Mexico, so
I am. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
All right. So the final typewriter community submitted question comes from Kelsey Pollard in Vancouver, Washington. Her question is very interesting. What would your ideal Frankenrider be made from to have the best feel, looks, quality, and typeface?
Okay, I think for the feel, I would probably pick like the Royal KMM, that kind of a typewriter. And for the looks, it would either be a letter at 22, like the, you know, Olivetti has good looking typewriters, or the Groma Calibri is really hard to argue with, or even like an SM3 or 4 Olympia, though one of those 4 kinds of typewriters for looks. And then for the quality of it, would be the Olympia or the Optima, right? One of those West German typewriters or East German typewriters in the case of the Optima. And then as far as typeface, I actually don't like the Vogue typeface as much as a lot of people do. I think it's one of those specialty typefaces that looks good in certain uses, but it's not necessarily universally good for everything. The same is true with the senatorial, or like the, what do you call, a techno typeface. I had one of those Olympias. It looks good for certain things, but I didn't like writing letters with it, personal letters. It looked a little informal. And the same thing is true with script or italic typefaces. It's not really good for everything. But as far as one of my favorites, I think the Optima Super that I have, and I don't know what the name of this typeface is, but you might recognize it. anyway, that looks a pretty good looking typeface. That looks pretty universal. You could use it for almost anything. So that's my favorite one. So that's my answer to the hybrid Franken typewriter. Is it would be the action of a upright standard Royal, the looks of either a Olivetti or a Groma Calibri or a Olympia, and of course the quality of an Olympia or Optima.
Excellent, excellent. All right, are you ready for the speed round?
Oh, the speed round. Yes, I have to find my answers to the speed round. What the hell did I do that? Yeah. Oh yeah, let's see. Okay, go for it.
All right. Tinker or type?
Type.
Form or function?
Function.
Manual or electric?
Both. Type bar electrics, not electronic, right?
Fix it or forget it?
Fix it within reason, but know your limits. In other words, don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself, right?
Is scratches and dents or picture perfect?
Scratches and dents.
Keep it simple or features galore?
Keep it simple.
To paint or not to paint?
Not to paint.
And fad or future?
Future. Yeah, I believe that we can keep the fleet running and we can improve the fleet.
Excellent, excellent. That's very encouraging because, yeah, we want to keep this going. All right, so there's just a couple more questions in closing. First of all, what advice do you have for the young enthusiast?
I would borrow a quote from Ted Monk, and that is, love the one you're with, meaning collect a few functional typewriters, enough that you can write well with them. I would prioritize function over beauty. Just because it's pink or blue doesn't mean you have to buy it. Olive drab, grays, browns, and blacks are fine. The important thing is functionality, right? To me. So don't chase pretty colors at first, unless you really know how to fix them or you're comfortable with paying somebody to fix them, right? So for functionality, I would prioritize standard typewriters over portables over ultra portables in that order, even though that's the opposite order that I started my collection in, because you see a little blue typewriter, right? It's blue and it's little. Oh, it's so cute. And yeah, but it's going to be the worst possible typewriter to type on, probably. At least it won't be the best, right? So I would prioritize a standard typewriter first. And they're generally pretty drab looking, let's face it, right? I would also say save up some money to buy a fully restored machine from a respectable, reputable, experienced repair person versus acquiring a dozen broken typewriters that you can't really fix on your own. I spent maybe $300 for my Optima, maybe from John Lewis, and it's totally stripped down to the last part and reassembled and cleaned and all that. And I would rather do that than have $10, $30 junkers that are never going to be working as well as that one. So, and also you're going to be keeping somebody in business, right?
Exactly.
I would also I would prioritize going on a road trip to buy a typewriter versus shipping it, right? If it's within reasonable distance. Because road trips are fun. You get to meet the person, maybe you learn a little bit about them, and you don't have to incur the risk of damage. And I keep thinking of all the typewriters that have been damaged in shipping, right? There's only a finite number of them out there. Yeah, there were a lot of them made, but I hate to see them get broken in the process of us trying to collect them, right? I would also prioritize writing over fondling or purposeless collecting. Now, when I use fondling, I'm referring to in the photography world, we have the idea of camera fondlers. Where's my camera here? Yes, I'm going to fondle my camera instead of take pictures with it, right? So I would prioritize writing, first of all, over, in other words, get yourself one good standard typewriter and write with it, right? And also, I would prioritize learn from the typosphere community. use the resources that are out there, right? The Typosphere website, the typewriter database, the bloggers, the Facebook groups, learn from these people, learn from the more experienced. And then I would emphasize creating with words over collecting gear or hoarding, right? I would emphasize the creative side of it, even though, I currently have maybe, 30 something machines, but I've gotten rid of a few also over the years. Okay.
Yeah, you've been good about that.
Well, I'm sort of forced to by my domestic situation.
Yeah.
In order to maintain domestic tranquility.
Yes. All right. So, and now let's look at it from another perspective. What advice do you have for the seasoned collector?
For the seasoned collector, I would say enable the newcomers, and don't talk down to them, and be polite and treat them with respect, that they don't know what you know, and don't, be, I see this on especially Facebook, people that must get impatient with re-answering the same questions over and over from newcomers, but realizing this is the process, this is the path that newcomers take. They enter into the hobby, they don't know anything about it, they ask really basic questions. We should be, just patient enough to answer them, right? I would share with people to get more involved in writing, right? In other words, emphasize the creative side of it over the collecting side of it, right? In other words, putting the machines to use. I would try to have the seasoned collector help enable people to write, even if that's pointing them towards resources like how to learn to touch type, or how to get it by with 2-finger typing and write with it. And I would emphasize using the typewriters over hanger queens and a beauty contest only, right? It's not just about the looks and having beautiful glass cabinets full of typewriters, and that's fine if you want to do that, but it's really about using them, because they really stay in better condition if you use them. And then over time, improving your stable of typewriters for enabling them to be useful as writing tools, right? This is one thing that Ted Monk has been really good about, is taking his stable of typewriters, improving them. So it's for the seasoned collector to help enable novices to maintain their machines over the long haul.
Excellent, excellent. All right, we've made some great time on this. So we have plenty of time for some YouTube comments. So first of all, in the comments, we have Ted joining us. He says, aloha, guys. All right, and then Brenda Blomberg says, good morning, Gregory and Joe. Good morning.
Hi, Brenda.
And let's see, Natasha Rawls says, hey, Gregory and Joe.
Hey, Natasha.
Typewriter Muse says, yes.
Hello, Bob.
Yeah. And then let's see, Diane says, hello, everyone. Hello, Diane.
Hi, Diane.
Oh, there we go. Let's see here. YYC Typewriter. Sean says, howdy, y'all.
Howdy. Hey.
Then we have Bernardo in Portugal says, good morning, everyone.
Hey, I got your postcard, Bernardo.
Oh, excellent. Ted says, Joe's office is shaping up, looking organized.
Well, I have the camera pointed to the nicer looking half, not the junkier looking half with all the cables and everything. You have to understand, everything on TV is fake. Like when I visited my local PBS television station a few years ago, because my friend Bob worked down there, I was surprised by, the studio that they use for the live begathon, which, by the way, I invented that term. Thank you very much. For and what is it? Quarterly begathon, right? Anyway, the studio, when you see it on TV, you imagine it's a huge room, right? It's not. It's tiny, and right off camera, where the camera can't see, is all kinds of junk and clutter and dusty things. it's just whatever you see on camera, that's what you see. That's one of the secrets to filmmaking.
Exactly. Let's see. Um, Ted says, "Oh noes, Joe's an android." So I think there may have been a part in there where you got the robot voice going. I don't know.
Oh, maybe
I didn't
so.
really hear anything, but um, let's see. Then we have looking for questions here. Ted Monk says, me sits back in a big chair and lets the sound below his tie back. Yeah, like the old, yeah, Memorex. They're talking about Memorex in the comments.
Yes, tape.
Mylin says that she totally agrees cybernetic are better than electronic machines as the main reason we love them. Yep. Christopher McKellar says hello from Bryce Canyon National Park. Ooh,
all right.
Yeah, out and about.
Yes.
Let's see here. I believe Maylene is asking what typewriter you have in front of you.
Off to the side is the Royal 10. And I don't have one in front of me. I have my notes from
Okay.
the questions. Written with a red pen, by the way.
Let's see. And I guess people were giving their own answers of the typewriter that was in front of them. Ted said a Groma Calibri, and Dan Linder said an Olympia Splendid. Oh, I love those.
Yeah.
Oh, here's a question. So Kent Peterson asks, how do you decide what creative projects become videos or blog entries or one-typed pages? That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think it's if there's some new angle, like it could be something I've covered before. Like I've done a bunch of photography videos on homemade pinhole cameras or whatever. But if there's a new angle or something new I want to show, I'll make a new video about it. Like to give you an example, a few weeks ago, I have this pinhole camera. It's not in front of me. This pinhole camera that has an arm sleeve. You reach into the back of the arm sleeve, you open up a door, and you can swap out paper, right? And so you can carry like an inch thick stack of photo paper, like maybe 100 sheets of photo paper in the camera. So you could go on a whole vacation trip and have all the photos in the camera. Well, I showed that initially a couple of weeks ago or whenever it was, maybe a month ago. But this morning, I took the arm sleeve off and then I sanded it really good with a random orbital sander because the wood was unfinished. It had some glue, stains on it and all that. So, and now I have some butcher block finishing kind of oil that I put on it. So I might just show that, or I might find another angle. Maybe I'll just go out and go down to the Rio Grande and take some pictures with it, right? Now, I haven't done one of those videos in a while, is carrying a still camera and a tripod and a video camera and a tripod and documenting yourself with two tripods. Yeah, maybe I'll do one of those. So yeah, if there's another angle, like an example would be the Royal KMM here, right? I've done a number of typewriter videos about it. Like initially when I brought it, like a couple of years ago when I took it back from Colorado Springs to service it, I made a video about that. And then when I inherited it from my aunt, I've done a video about that. And then the more recent one where I finally went through several rounds of finding the right ribbon for it until now I have a silk ribbon and it looks like it's the ideal imprint density for that particular machine. So if there's some new angle, that's kind of what I will make another video about.
And with like one type page, do you deliberately sit down and say, okay, I'm gonna write this for one type page? Or
I generally do that because, like, example would be, let's see, here you go. If I do a one type page, let me focus on this. See how the title is up there, OTP and then Optima Super. I'll usually write that way, and I'm sitting there with a blank page thinking about, what am I gonna write about? But sometimes it'll be just a private journal entry, like my vision for my office reorganization, for instance, right? And that wasn't a one-type page. So usually I will, a one-type page article is going to be something that I don't mind sharing with the public. It's something that I'm trying to make sound pretty good on paper. Like, you know, the bar is raised pretty high as a writer if you're contributing to one type page. In one sense, because you have a lot of really good writers and poets and people like that. But on the other hand, they're very accepting of anybody. You know, you don't have to be a professional writer, but I like to do my best if I can. So, but there are times when I've written one type page blogs and I decide not to share it on one type page, but instead I'll put it on my own blog and I'll just crop the photo to leave out the title. So it doesn't say OTP, right? And I've done that a few times also.
What's involved in that decision process? Like why would you decide, okay, maybe this is better for my blog?
Oh yeah, it could be something that's more technical, you know, like could be the minutia of, you know, one of these camera making projects with my friend Ethan, right? Something that the typical one type page person may not be really interested in. And after typing and I'm reading, I realized, you know, this is kind of more, it's not really about what's going on that day or about, I think people on one type page are interested in writing and the writing lifestyle. And they're also interested in what's going on in your life. They're also interested in poetry and fiction, right? Having a little, either one page fiction or an ongoing series, right? That's presented one page at a time. So things that I like to do that are more technical writing, I'll probably not do as much on one type page. And my blog, my personal blog, doesn't get updated as often as it used to. It's maybe once a month now, but I do like to include things on it like more technical stuff, right? And the person that inspires me for that is Ted, of course, because Ted is always usually uses his blog for technical things, you know, relating usually to typewriters.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so that clues it up for me how you would make that transition from, okay, this could be for one type page. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it's for my blog.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, so let's see here. Then we have Sean saying, I'm painting a typewriter related special project, skunkworks stuff.
Oh, it's going to be black with a
White stripes.
white stripe. Well, I was going to say black with a Lockheed Martin logo. Skunkworks.
Okay, so Diane has a question for you. When you are working on adjusting the upper or lowercase type on your machines, how do you figure out which one needs adjusting?
Oh, great question.
Yeah.
I usually start with the uppercase and I'll type the tallest character, maybe the slash or the parentheses or one of the fractions, and I'll see whether it's shaded or not on the upper or lower part. In other words, if it's faded a little bit on the top or bottom, you're going to want to adjust that first to get rid of the shading, because the taller uppercase characters can be cut off easier, or it's easier for them to be missed, right? So you want to get that set first and then match the lowercase to it. Even though on some machines, the original factory service literature recommended the opposite order, I always like to do it in that order because it guarantees that the uppercase characters are going to be imprinted properly, right? With no shading.
Yes, and when we were talking about analog and digital, Ted commented, "I still think of analog as a sci-fi magazine."
Yes, that was a good magazine, in fact.
Yeah,
Along with Omni. Omni was a good magazine. That was, if you remember, published by the guy that published Penthouse, but it was science fiction and science essays.
Oh.
In the late 70s and sometime in the mid 80s, it probably went out of business. But yeah, Omni magazine was pretty cool.
Okay. Let's see. Um, No, at some point, um, Ted says that's a lot of talky talk to avoid answering the question, what color are they? I'm not sure what that was in reference
Oh,
to.
that was on refer to the UFOs. What color are they?
Oh, okay. Got
Well,
it.
I think the answer is going to be along the lines of um, if they employ advanced stealth technology, then they can choose whatever wavelengths of light to absorb or to reflect. So they can be whatever color they want you to see them as.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
How's that for not answering the question?
I know,
Well,
right?
the other answer would be, of course, they're silver. They're metallic silver, like the classic flying saucer from the 1950s. Come on, Ted, you know this. You've seen The Day the Earth Stood Still. You know how they're supposed to look.
And then we have Dan Linder saying my pronunciation of Westeros, Sweden was excellent. And he thanked you for answering his question. Let's see here. Ken Peterson says the editing by audio technique is really cool.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Well, I think the audio track is really important.
Yes.
You don't want to hear all the ums and ahs and the pauses and all that. You want it to be a good sounding thing first, you know?
Yeah. And I liked how you have your method of creating a few seconds of silence while you continue recording, and then you see that silence in the audio form, and you can pick it out easily. I know our own Bob Marshall from Typewriter Muse, he has his podcast, and he gave me a little behind the scenes tip that he uses when he's recording his audio and he makes a mistake. He does a loud clapping sound, so it creates a spike in the audio form. So that would be another method. But
I actually do that when if I'm recording audio. Occasionally I'll record audio from something other source, and I'll try to do a clap with my hands visible on camera. And if you line up the two sources, you can get the whole clip to line up. That's another good technique. That one of those things you can do in iMovie is you overlay the second clip on top of the first one, get them synced, and then you can edit. You can actually cut parts out of each one of them and keep all of them synchronized after that, which is
excellent. Cool. All right, and then we have Afex Technol says, "Hey Joe, just dropping by to say hello from a longtime friend."
Yes, that's Mitch, our friend Mitch up
in
Ohio.
Okay, excellent. And also hello to Gregory. So hello. Let's see. Brian Good says, is Japanese consumer electronics brand JVC named after you?
It's actually named after Japanese Victor Company, because RCA Victor started that subsidiary back in I don't know if it was prior to World War II or not, but certainly after the war. And JVC was the patent owner for VHS. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then Ted comments, I think this was referring to your drafting class. He says, house is full of hot air.
Yes, yeah, definitely full of hot air.
Yeah.
Oh, this is something else I should share with you. My friend Ethan Moses, who you guys have seen on the videos, he made a blimp a few years ago, a full-size blimp, helium blimp.
Oh, wow.
And he's also was interested in airships. And my friend Bill Taft was interested in the history of Zeppelins. So,
wow.
And we didn't even know this until we were talking a few weeks ago, Bill and I. So there's a lot of weird, like, we have a neighbor next to my family home, next to where we lived, who worked for Sandia National Laboratories. It turns out Bill knew this guy, had visited him, so he was right next to where we lived. And this guy, Don Schuster, ended up being a vice president for Sandia Labs. And his name comes up prominently in the history of Sandia Labs. Anyways, a lot of these like common things that you don't realize are happening between people that, that are kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a mysterious thing how certain people are drawn together and find out they have more in common than they realized.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
definitely.
is fun.
All right, so let's see here. Maylin says, we love our typewriter church brunch chats.
That's right.
Then we have Liz G. She says, Joe, you're an inspiration and a gift to the typosphere. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Since you're a busy man, I'm wondering, where do you find the time to do all of your hobbies?
The only reason is because I work a compressed work week, and I have long weekends, and I have a wife that lets me do that.
Let's see. Malin says, technology gives us better ways to share. Some social media apps have photo editing and video production features, great ways to tell stories about our typewriters.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah. It's really an exciting time for people that do thrive on storytelling, such as yourself.
I mean, there's other forms of video related social media like TikTok. I mean, you can imagine, you could in theory start a really short 30-second, 1 minute short clips on TikTok that aren't just like entertainment related, like usually it is, right? With kids doing weird stuff, but you could make something inspiring people to go get interested in typewriters that way, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I'll be doing more of that. This brings to mind also, I'm going to switch my ear thing because it's making me itch my ear. My friend Ethan has given me a lot of good feedback about my channel, and one of the things that he's told me I should improve is my descriptions of my typewriter videos. I've stuck with typewriter video series, episode, whatever, and then some name. And he's told me repeatedly that I need to change the name to just simply what it's about so that it can be searched by the algorithm better. And he's right. I should do that. But I'm stuck on this format of having a title a certain way, and it would break the format to not call it Typewriter Video Series episode 279 or 280 or whatever, right? What are we up to, by the way?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah. This, by the way, is my typewriter or my video logbook.
Ooh.
And it's a circa bound, and all it is a short, brief description of, let me increase my shutter speed if I can. Stop down the lens.
There we go.
It just shows like the date and the title and what equipment I used and how long it was and how I rendered it. So, I can go down here and let's see, the last typewriter video is 278 or whatever, so anyways. And this goes all the way back to 2017 when it started, when this book started. So the last, few years.
Yeah. Very good. Let's see here. We have Brenda Blomberg saying quality over quantity for sure.
Yes.
Sarah Van Allen says 100% agree with Joe's advice about how to prioritize the machines you collect. Yeah, that's definitely good advice.
I'm amazed. Even like the other day, I saw some newcomer to typewriters on the Facebook group, and it was talking about now they have 10 typewriters, and and they don't, none of them work very well, and I need help. And it's like, well, maybe you got in too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to it's not just about collecting, it's really about using them, right? What they're intended to be used for, right? Is exactly. Creative tools.
Exactly. Lynn Johansson says, Joe's such a nice guy. Never change, Joe. we do love Joe.
Try not to.
Sarah Van Allen says, thank you, Joe, for your kindness and patience. Jay McDermott says, Joe, your online videos are an incredible resource for the typewriter community. Thank you for all you have done and continue to do.
You're welcome.
Oh, this is a very interesting question. So this comes from Brenda Blomberg. She says, Joe, how did you and Ted meet?
Let's see. I think I went on a vacation trip to the Mesa, Phoenix area, and I had emailed Ted that I was coming down there and we should get together. And we did. And it might have been the first time I visited Mesa Typewriter Exchange. And of course, Ted and Bill Wall, who owned Mesa Typewriter, they're really good friends, right? Ted is like a fixture around Bill's shop a lot of times. Yeah. So yeah, I think it was the first time I went down to visit Mesa Typewriter Exchange. And I met Ted, and we had a good time. He took me around to all the thrift stores, that he goes to. It was a lot of fun. And then I've been back twice maybe since then, I think. So
Excellent. And from Ted's perspective, in the comments, he says, Typosphere initially, he drove down for one of the big Arizona type-ins once.
Yes, that's true, right. Yes.
And then says, and then came down with Kittle to pick up an ideal.
Yeah.
And we all met at Bill Wall's. But for years, we only knew each other from the Typosphere.
Yes, that's right. I did attend one, actually I attended two of the Phoenix type-ins. And one of them is where I sold a couple of I think I sold two Calibris and the Underwood Universal to local people in Phoenix. And yeah, that was fun. And I really was inspired by those Phoenix type-ins to start our own type-ins here in Albuquerque. That's what got me started, because I saw how they did it, and I saw that it wasn't really that hard to do. Excuse me. I was wanting to hopefully do some videos about how to start your own type-ins. What do you need to do? But I've kind of put that off on hold because so many parts of the US, because of the response to COVID, it's difficult to have public meetings.
Exactly.
Depends on where you're at, of course.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
Yeah. That'll be in the future, hopefully.
Yeah. And then Bernardo says, good to know you got the postcard.
Yes. Thank you.
Natasha says, thank you for your encouraging words about my series, Not to Give Up. And so grateful for your feedback. I believe she's referring to her series on One Type Page.
Yes. It's very interesting.
Excellent. And then she says, my daughter always tells me to get on TikTok. I've looked at TikTok personally. And I even have, I think, one or two videos. I think a couple of videos on there, but I don't know. Have you ever considered?
Yeah, I kind of thought about it. I mean, I think us old people need to probably get on those media channels also, right? Just to let them know that we're still around.
Yeah.
For no other reason than to irritate the youngsters.
And then the final comment comes from Diane Mayer. I wish I had gone to some thrift stores with you while I was down there for one of your type outs.
Yeah, well, they can be spotty at times. It's not nearly as good as probably the Phoenix area. And probably part of the reason is because in Arizona, you have a lot of snowbirds who come down to retire and then they pass away, and their personal effects oftentimes get put into thrift stores because maybe their families aren't living in Phoenix, right? They're far away. So we don't have that as much here. So yeah, the thrift stores can be a little more spotty. And then a few of the thrift stores went out of business around, in the 2020 time period because of the shutdowns. But yeah, it would be fun to do that. No guarantees you'll find a usable typewriter, but it's always good to go to thrift stores, even if you don't find typewriters. There's other things.
Yeah, sometimes it's just about the hunt.
It is. And I think that's part of the attraction is the hunt. Well, when I was raised as a kid, my dad and stepmother went to antique stores and flea markets a lot. They were collecting Jim Beam bottles, carnival glass, Native American jewelry and all that stuff back in the early 70s. And our house had at one point 13 antique china cabinets full of Jim Beam bottles, curio glass, carnival glass, and all this stuff. It looked like a museum.
Yeah. We have Ted Monkey says, us oldsters need to get on the youngsters' lawns.
We do. That's right. Get on their lawns.
And we'll end with this last question, which is actually a great question from Maylin. She asks, where is your favorite place to type?
I like going on trips, and I like staying in a bed and breakfast and sitting on some porch, a covered porch on a Victorian house, bed and breakfast, and typing. I've been to a few places. I remember there was one in Silver City, New Mexico that's pretty nice, but I don't think I've found the perfect place yet. I mean, they're all, how many bed and breakfasts can you go to in your lifetime, right? I hope to visit them all someday, but so that's a kind of a general answer, right? I like my patio. My front patio is nice. That's the closest place. It's nice.
Yeah, I always enjoy your videos of you out there typing. So
Yeah.
I think your one of your lap typing videos was done out there.
Mm-hmm.
Typing on the pillow,
Yep.
pillow on your lap.
I've tried a lot of different things with typing out there.
Exactly. I think you've tried it all, really. And that's one thing we love about you. And so I do really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to do this.
You're welcome.
I know, it was some time you had to dedicate to this, and I appreciate your time. And we also really, really, really appreciate all you do for the typewriter community with your videos, your blog, your one type page. It's all very, very valuable for the typewriter community. So thank you for all that.
You are welcome. And I appreciate all of you guys too.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you again, Joe. And thank you everybody for watching. This was another wonderful one. Next week, we will be going back to our regular Typewriter Club live meetings at 9 a.m. That's the new time. We started that last week, 9 a.m. So be sure, and that's Pacific. So 9 a.m. Pacific, Sunday mornings. Yeah, and be sure and go to typepals.com/events. And that's where you'll find the future meetings listed. So, all right. Thanks again, Joe. And hopefully to see you next Sunday.
Yes, I hope so too. Bye, everybody.